What if I told you one of the most common ways to measure health, your body mass index or BMI, is not only flawed, but it might actually be misleading you about your health? We've been told for years that BMI is the golden standard for determining if you are a healthy weight. But the truth is, BMI doesn't really work. Alright, let's start with the basics. BMI was invented back in the 1830s by a Belgian mathematician named Adolphe Quetelet. Yes, you heard me right, a mathematician, not a doctor. Quetelet was trying to understand the average man, not figuring out how healthy individuals were. He took a formula that simply divided a person's weight by their height squared and came up with the now familiar BMI. At the time, it was never meant to measure health. It was just a statistical tool for studying populations. Fast forward almost 2 centuries, and somehow this mathematical equation, created long before modern medicine, has become the standard by which we judge whether someone is underweight, at a normal weight, overweight, or obese. But does this equation, created in an era where people didn't even know about DNA, really reflect what we now understand about health? Spoiler, it doesn't. Here is where things get interesting. BMI looks only at two things: your weight and your height. It doesn't consider muscle mass, body fat percentage, bone density, or even distribution of fat in your body. Let me put it into perspective. Imagine you are looking at a professional athlete, say a bodybuilder or sprinter. They are muscular, lean, clearly in excellent shape. Yet, according to BMI, many of them would be classified as overweight or even obese. Does that sound right to you? No, because BMI doesn't differentiate between fat and muscles. We all know that muscles are more dense than fat. So someone who is muscular will naturally weigh more and therefore have a higher BMI. On the flip side, someone with very little muscle but a high percentage of body fat could be classified as having a normal BMI. Think about that for a second. A person could be normal on the BMI scale but have an unhealthy level of fat stored in their body. That fat, particularly if it's around the organs, can increase the risk of conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure. But BMI would never tell you that. This is where BMI starts to fall apart. It assumes that all weight is created equal, but we know that that's not the case. Fat stored around your waist, also known as visceral fat, is much more dangerous than fat stored in other areas, like on your hips and thighs. Yet BMI doesn't take into account where the fat is stored. It just lumps everything together as weight. In reality, two people could have the same BMI but have vastly different health outcomes depending on where they store fat in their bodies. Now, you might be wondering, if BMI doesn't account for muscles, fat distribution, or overall health risks, why are we still using it? Well, that's a very good question, and the answer is rooted in convenience. BMI is cheap and easy to calculate. All we need is a scale and a tape measure. It's been used by insurance companies, doctors, and public health organizations because it's simple and provide quick results. But just because something is easy doesn't mean it's right. Let's take a closer look at some of the major flaws of BMI and why it can be so misleading. First up, BMI doesn't account for difference in age or gender. As we age, we naturally lose muscle mass and gain fat. A 70-year-old man might have a normal BMI, but if they lost muscles over the years, they could be at the risk for things like fragility, reduced mobility, and even a high risk of falls. Yet BMI wouldn't catch that because it's not designed to measure muscle mass or bone density. The gender you're born with matters too. Women tend to have more body fat than men, even when they are healthy. That's just biology. But BMI uses the same scale for both men and women, which doesn't make sense. Women with perfectly healthy levels of body fat might end up being labeled as overweight by BMI standards, while men with less fat might fall into normal range even if they have other health risks. Then we have the issue of race and ethnicity. Research have shown that BMI doesn't work the same way across different populations. For example, people of Asian descent tend to have a higher risk of health problems like diabetes at a lower BMI compared to Caucasian populations. Meanwhile, people of African descent may have a higher muscle mass at the same BMI, which skews the results. Yet the BMI system applies as a one size fits all approach that doesn't consider these important differences. So, why does this matter? Because basing health decision on a number that is so flawed can have serious consequences. Let's say someone has a normal BMI, but they have a high level of visceral fat, or they are pre-diabetic. They might think they're in the clear because their BMI is fine, and they might not get the medical attention they actually need. On the flip side, someone with a high BMI but a healthy body composition might be told they need to lose weight even though they are perfectly healthy. This can lead to unnecessary dieting, unhealthy eating behaviors, and even body dysmorphia. People are told to focus on losing weight rather than building muscles or improving their overall fitness. The obsession with BMI often leads people to chase the wrong goals. Instead of focusing on health markers like cholesterol levels, blood pressure, or physical fitness, they fixate on hitting a certain number on the scale. And when they don't hit that number, it can lead to the feeling of failure, frustration, and even shame. So, what should we be looking at instead of BMI? Well, there are several alternatives that paint a much clearer picture of someone's health. One option is body fat percentages. Unlike BMI, which lumps all weight together, body fat percentages measures how much of your weight comes from fat and how much comes from muscles, bones, and water. This gives a far more accurate reflection of whether you are carrying too much fat. A person with a healthy body fat percentage might have a higher BMI, but their risk of health problems would be much lower. Another option is waist to hip ratio, which measures where fat is distributed on your body. Studies have shown that people with higher waist to hip ratio, meaning more fat around the waist, are at greater risk for heart disease and diabetes. And this is regardless of their BMI. This is also a simple and effective way to measure risk, and yet it is far less commonly used than BMI. There's also the waist to height ratio, which focuses on how your waist size compared to your height. The idea here is that your waist should be less than half of your height to reduce health risks. This method is more predictive of health outcomes than BMI, yet it doesn't get nearly the same attention. And let's not forget about the overall importance of fitness. Studies have shown that people who are physically active and have good cardiovascular fitness are at a lower risk of heart disease, diabetes, and early death, even if their BMI is higher. In fact, fit individuals with higher BMIs often have better health outcomes than sedentary individuals with normal BMIs. And at the end of the day, health is about more than a number on the scale or a formula that divides your weight by your height. It's about how your body functions, how strong and fit you are, and how well your internal system are working. BMI doesn't capture any of that. So if you're still using BMI as your primary measure of health, it might be time to rethink things. Your health isn't a math problem, and your body can't be summed up by a simple equation. Instead of chasing a certain BMI, focus on what really matters: how you feel, how your body moves, and what your body is capable of. Because when it comes down to it, BMI doesn't work, and your health deserves better. And if you want to know more about nursing and health, then check out this video right here, which YouTube thinks you will like. So check it out because I for sure will.